Intros, we have with us today Marty Lewis, our software development manager, Steve Ives, senior consultant and product manager, Jeff Green, our chief technology officer, and introducing Amy Spain, our new customer support and enablement manager. And my name is Liz, and I am the education services program manager. So a whole crew today. And I think we're going to start with Steve, who has some synergy related updates for us this morning.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly go through where we're at with the main products. Some of you will know there's been some changes in that regard recently, in particular in the way that we're releasing software in the future. We're kind of right in the middle of a transition from our old way of releasing software to our new. And the new way essentially is based around a release strategy called long-term support releases. Which, if you're in the Linux world, you're probably fairly familiar with. A lot of the Linux operating systems have been doing this for quite some time, where they identify a particular release as being particularly stable, and the fact that they're going to support that release for an extended period of time that's predefined, and you know exactly how long that period will be, and so on. So we're switching to a similar mechanism. I'm not going to go through all the details now. But if you are not aware of those changes and want to learn a little bit more, then perhaps head on over to the website and in particular look at the blog. A few months ago now, if you look back a few months into sort of middle of last year, you'll find some information on that. And maybe Liz, maybe you can post a link to that in the chat at some point. So in terms of the actual products themselves, we recently did an SDE release that was 11.11i, the latest in the Synergy 11 series. It's likely to be, unless something dramatic happens in the upcoming weeks, likely to be the final release in the version 11 series. Again, last year, if you're not aware, we did make a slight change in that we announced that we would no longer publish new functionality in patch releases. So this is a quality improvement release only. There are no new features in there. It's just simply bug fixes, as it's the same for the previous few releases in the version 11 series as well. One thing to note about 11.11i particularly is that it is the release that first formally introduces support for Windows 11 and for Windows Server 2022. It's a little bit different on this occasion because Microsoft actually did make some fairly significant changes in the way that some UI gets painted in those operating systems. And we did have to do some work specifically to support, in particular, Synergy Windows and UI Toolkit applications painting correctly on Windows. So if you are going to go to Windows 11 or Server 2022, you probably do actually need to go to 11.11i in order to achieve that. In the past, you could probably get away with running older versions that were technically supported on that operating system. In this case, there's a pretty good chance you'll actually have to go to 11.11i, so just bear that in mind. Also, I'm not going to talk at length of this because Marty will talk about SDI, the development tools, shortly. But we did do an SDI release earlier this week, on Monday, in fact. Again, we've changed we've changed the version numbering scheme on SDI a few versions back. So this release is 2022-01, indicating January, and a build number of 1003. So just as always, we recommend that you use the latest and greatest SDI at all times for all developers, regardless of platform. You can always use runtime version targeting if necessary to target back to the old runtime versions that you're supporting on your production systems. But we encourage you to get up to date with that latest version of SDI. And just one note, again, not in this release, but in 2 or 3 releases back, we did change the platforms that SDI supports. Currently supporting Visual Studio 2019 and 22, and Visual Studio 2017 and earlier are no longer supported. as well as, again, related to the transition that we've got going on to our new LTS scheme, which will involve a change in version number mechanisms as well. We also, at the same time as having a current 11.11i release, have a 12.0 release, which is essentially what we call a feature release leading up to the first LTS release. So feature releases trickle in new features as they're developed and as they're ready for use, and then they will be formally a set of functionality will be formally supported in a long-term support release. So we do have a current feature release which has been out there since I forget exactly when, sometime in October, was it? I forget. So that's an opportunity for you to test things that are coming up in Synergy 12.1. We will be planning a new feature release in the 12.0 series on Friday the 21st, so a week on Friday. And at that point, that will represent code freeze for us for the 12.1 LTS release that's coming up. And after that, it will simply be any issues that arise, any bugs that need fixing before we do the final LTS release. So we would strongly encourage everybody, if you have the slightest opportunity, please help us test the 12.0 release that's coming out in 2 weeks' time, or less than 2 weeks' time, because it is your opportunity to sort of get any issues that need addressing locked in before the final 12.1 LTS release, which will take place in March. So what's in version 12? Very briefly, there's a whole bunch of stuff. As you probably already know, we've been talking about this for a long time. It's primarily around supporting as well as supporting the .NET framework in all of the various different places that Synergy and .NET touch. We'll also be supporting .NET 6, which formerly was known as .NET Core. So in places like the .NET Assembly API, for example, and the .NET versions of all of our optional libraries, the XML library and the SQL library and the repository library, all of those things, there will be .NET versions of those rather than .NET Framework. By the way, in terms of terminology, when we try and it's kind of complicated. Microsoft made things very complicated when they called the new product set simply .NET. Previously .NET was kind of a generic term for that everybody understood meant .NET Framework. Now it doesn't. So we kind of follow what Microsoft do, and if we're talking about .NET Framework, the older original .NET environment, then we call it .NET Framework. The newer environments that were formerly called .NET Core, then .NET 5, and now .NET 6, we simply refer to as .NET going forward. So .NET is no longer a generic term. It specifically refers to, in terms of released products, .NET 6 and later. We also have a .NET standard version of XFNetlink.NET that you could use in Framework or .NET environments. And that is available via NuGet. So that's a different way of getting the XFNetlink assembly. And like I say, it works in the .NET environment. So if you have XF Server plus XFNetlink type applications that you want to move forward into the newer technologies, then again, that's available for use. On Windows, we should note that we've replaced our use of OpenSSL with Windows S Channel or Secure Channel. So that makes it easier for you. You no longer need to be concerned with installing OpenSSL and copying DLLs into the DBL bin directory and so on. You will no longer need to provide CA files, certification authority files, if you're doing HTTPS. You can still provide them if you wish, so your code won't break, but we recommend removing that functionality. Just don't pass that parameter once you get to version 12, and then relying on the CA list that is essentially baked into the operating system and maintained by Microsoft and through Windows updates and so on. Socket API has had some minor changes. SQL Connection API, nothing that changes the API, just internal changes. Again, same for SQL Connection. So if you have these kind of apps, we'd really appreciate you just testing them and making sure everything's working in Synergy 12. As I mentioned already, all of the optional libraries are now available from NuGet rather than via add reference. And one change that we're all kind of excited about and looking forward to we have support for configuring Linux systems as clients to Windows license servers. So no longer do you need to specifically configure licenses on a Linux VM or machine or whatever it is. You can actually just set it to point to a Windows license server and share those Windows licenses that are available on that system. So several use cases for that, development VMs, that'll be pretty handy. And also it opens up the possible containerization of Linux applications, which in turn, in the future, opens up the possibility of doing cloud deployment of Linux apps in like Kubernetes environments and that sort of stuff. So there's some really exciting stuff there. And lots more. There are lots of individual features, way too many to go into at this point. But again, if you install version 12 when it comes out, or when the final release comes out a week on Friday, go look at the release notes and you'll find details of all of the specific changes there. There is one more thing that's coming up that will become part of the LTS release, but not in the initial form, which may sound kind of weird because the whole point of an LTS is once you release it, it's set in stone and it's only bug fixes from that point on. But we will be adding support for Synergy.net, .NET 6 running on Linux systems. We can do that because it's not strictly a new feature. Technically, it's a new platform. So we don't believe this may not be ready for the initial LTS release, but certainly will follow shortly afterwards if that's not the case. And we're all excited about that because for one thing, it will allow our many Harmony Core customers now who have Linux backend systems, they will be able to start hosting those Harmony Core services and any other services written in .NET that they wish directly on their Linux systems rather than requiring a Windows server to front those services for the Linux backend. So that'll be both a convenience improvement and a performance improvement as well. Okay, I think that's all I have, unless there are any specific questions about products and releases. That's all I have for the product update, Liz.
We did actually get a question in from Noreen, who asks, is there a link to a blog or the NuGet package or xfnl/xfsp.net support?
Okay. Yes, I don't have it offhand, but if you go to NuGet.com and search for Synergex, you will find a whole list of our packages. I can do it right now.
I just pasted it in the answer.
So if you go to NuGet.org, isn't it? NuGet.org and search for Synergex. If you can type. Where are we? Yeah, NuGet.org and search for Synergex, and you'll get a whole list of all of the various packages that are available.
When a question is answered in the Q&A, it moves to a different kind of discrete section. So I'll go ahead and post the same link in the general chat area because it kind of hides itself. There we go. Oh, and then Terry asks, what versions of Linux are supported with version 12?
I don't believe there's any changes in the base OS requirements. So whatever was, I apologize, I don't have the actual kernel numbers, but it's not changed since version 11.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you, Steve. I think now we'll move on to our Harmony Core updates. If we have those.
Sure, yeah. So not too much has happened since the last Harmony Core office hours, thanks to a nice big vacation period in the middle there. We did actually release a version that fixed a couple of bugs. We put in a channel recycler for environments that have a constrained maximum channel count. So like XF Server to OpenVMS has a much smaller maximum channel count than other platforms. So the way the recycler works is it if it's made it up to the limit, it'll start pulling from available channels, and it will close them and then reuse that channel number. So it just makes more efficient use of your resources in those environments, and then we don't end up with cannot open channel because too many channels are open already on the connection. So that's an improvement there. And there's also a fix in there for certain shapes of relationship getting expanded that was previously reporting an internal server error and is now returning correct data. So that is the changes we have in Harmony Core.
And then I think in our last Harmony Core office hours, Steve, you had mentioned that there's something that users will now have to kind of update manually. So I don't know if you still wanted to run through that demo quickly.
Sure, yeah, and it's documented as well, but I'll just run through the process. Let me just share a screen.
I can see it now.
Okay. All right. So yeah, very briefly, one of the things that we ship in the standard environment, if you like, based basically with code that's provided by the project templates, is some code that reads some runtime configuration files called appsettings.json. And app settings, you can have a base file, which is what this one represents. And then you can have environment specific files that extend or either replace or add additional settings for specific environments. For example, appsettings.development.json. And these things, which one gets used, if you're not aware of this, is based on information that is in the, I forget where it is now exactly, where is it? Debug. It's in the debug setting in the project. So you have this environment variable ASP.NET Core environment, which by default is set to development by Visual Studio. And the idea is that you can define this variable to be development, staging, QA, production, different names to indicate to your app where it's running. And there are ways in .NET Core that you can test which environment am I in and run different code. But it also determines which app settings file is used. So we're in development mode. So we have these base settings, but they're then altered by the development file. So this is a great place to place environment variables that we all need to run our typical Synergy code, specifically if we're doing potentially for file access with OData, but particularly if we're doing traditional bridge and running code that has specific requirements and so on. It's just a great place to define environment variables. So we did discover a little while ago that there was a problem in the code that we're shipping to process this file. We have code that specifically reads this file and puts these environment variables in place. And because of the way we'd represented the environment variables in data, it wasn't working as we originally intended. So if you want to fix it, it's a pretty simple fix. What you basically need to do, actually, let me just put something over there. I'll show you that in a moment. There are a couple of changes you need to make in code to determine if you need to fix the code. If you edit in the models project, you will find this app settings file, which is a model that represents the settings. And if you scroll right to the bottom, if your code needs fixing, you will have this class called app environment variable. If that code is present, then it's the original code that it works kind of, but it doesn't work fully as intended. There's some problems in the way that the values get overlaid between the two files. So the first change you need to make to correct this is just get rid of that class altogether. It's no longer needed. The second change is in the way that the collection of environment variables is defined. You can see it was a list of app environment variable. And rather than that, we need to change its definition. We can't use that app environment variable now because we just deleted it. So we need to change it to a dictionary of string. So there's a second line that gets changed in this file. And then the final change is down here in where we process the environment variables and use setlog to set the values. So that needs to change. Again, the app environment variable type has gone away. So we simply replace it with a little bit of slightly different code, which processes the key value pair of string from the dictionary. And I think the ev.key was ev.name previously. So those are the three changes that you need to make to code. And then there are some changes to the structure of the app settings file itself. It turns out that we never actually utilized these ports. They're not used anywhere in the environment, so those can go away. And in fact, because we've changed from a class with named properties to a key value pair, we simply need to change the structure of the JSON file so that it looks like this. Basically, we have app settings with environment variables and then named properties with values to replace the previous class that had name and value. And then if you have a .development or any other files, you may have added others for other environments, then you simply need to make the similar change to that file also. Again, removing the HTTP and HTTPS ports and just slightly reworking the format of the JSON file. And that's how you apply the fix. That's all that's required. And now the environment variables will be set properly. Okay. If you want to know more details about how to do that, if you go to the Harmony Core documentation on GitHub into the wiki, there's a link down under advanced topics to improving app settings processing. And that's this page we're looking at here that has the instructions that I just went through with you. So it's a pretty simple process and documented there for you.
And now we'll hop over to Synergy and Visual Studio land. Marty, if you have anything for us.
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of months for the SDI product since the release of Visual Studio 2022 back in November. We shipped a release that month, which was 2021.11.3540, which was our first version to officially support Visual Studio 2022. Along with that release, we shipped functionality for supporting Visual Studio build tools for Visual Studio 2019 and 2022, which enables SDI to specifically target your build server type environment. And realistically, all that's doing is laying down the files that we need for MS Build to operate in that environment. So if on your build servers you are not installing full Visual Studio, you are installing Visual Studio build tools instead, we do support that now. Visual Studio 2022 support has been evolving since then. It wasn't until the final release of Visual Studio 2022 that we realized that we did have some other compatibility problems. So in December, we also shipped 2021.12 build number 3567, which improved our support, fixing an important crash issue that our compatibility that we're seeing between C# and Synergy projects, as well as a number of important compiler fixes. SDI is your vehicle for getting Synergy.net compiler fixes, in addition to the Synergy build tools NuGet package. Earlier this week, as Steve said, we shipped the first release of 2022, not to be confused with Visual Studio 2022. This was our 22.1.1003 build. This one continues to improve our support for Visual Studio 2022. We found additional problems related to NuGet packages and projects. However, this seems to be the end of our problem areas. Everything seems to be running smooth. Our users that are using the product have given us great feedback in this version. So hopefully this is your best stable start point for 2022 if you're not already using it. Additionally, in this build, there was a fix to a compiler regression. There's an important note and warning in that release note document about it. But if you are targeting a version greater 11.11d or greater as your runtime compatibility, and you take this build, you will need to make sure you rebuild all of your .NET code in order to ensure compatibility. It could cause runtime issues if you do not. So please, if you are targeting 11.11d or higher with the last several SDI builds, ensure you do a rebuild when you take this new build. Besides these seemingly monthly releases that the team has been putting out, we have been hard at work at wrapping up our support for script projects in Visual Studio. With the help of a couple of beta test customers, some of our customers with the largest script source bases that we know of, we have been narrowing down that feature for its final release. I'm excited to say that we are planning to ship that support by the end of this month. We were originally targeting by end of December, but we wanted to give our beta testers a little bit more time hands-on with the tool. So that is wrapping up, and I anticipate you will see it sometime after that next 12.0 feature release goes out. I think that is it for SDI right now. We do have a couple of other features in the works, but I don't want to spill the beans on that quite yet.
No, it's good to add an element of suspense.
Yeah.
Keep them coming back. Awesome. Thank you so much, Marty. So we'll do a quick education update as well. I'm going to share, let's see. So we should be seeing a screenshot.
Yep.
So perfect. So if you attended our first virtual conference last year, you may have heard of this online course that was in the early stages of development around May of 2021. And now I can happily say it's in the later stages of development. And just a little context on what this is. So, in a pre-pandemic world, we had a Synergy DBL Essentials in-person course, and it was super information dense. Participants would fly to our office, spend a week learning the basics of Synergy in that kind of in-person synchronous format. And then obviously 2020 hit, and we had to adapt on the fly because we had new Synergy developers being onboarded. So we had several iterations of what the remote version of that might look like. And this online course is really the kind of long-term solution to the new context that we're all operating in effectively. With some of the kind of advantages of an online-based platform. So the screenshot I'm sharing is what this course looks like within our learning management system. And as you can see, it has the interface where you can kind of, in this left bar here, you can see what modules are included in the course, and then within that, what, I guess, assets are in each module. So you might have a text page, you might have a PDF you download, you might have a video, and it tells you how long the video is. So it's a nice interface for kind of visualizing your progress as a learner and seeing how much of the course you have left. And it is asynchronous, which means you, as the learner, you can decide how quickly you would like to finish the course. If you're new, if you're a totally new Synergy developer and you need to get caught up to speed with your colleagues, you might want to blaze through it as quickly as possible. But if you're a seasoned Synergy developer and you're just trying to refresh your skills, maybe you do a module a month. It's really up to you. So overall, there are about 70 videos, 24-ish PDFs, a bunch of coding exercises. So it's really the same kind of information dense course, but just in a different delivery method, I suppose. And we will have, there are more kind of distance learning pedagogy items that are included in this course, but we'll talk about that in a separate webinar, I think. But just wanted to kind of put that out there for everybody, get it on your radar. Because again, I think it could work for new Synergy developers, or the years go by and you kind of get into a set way of programming things. So if you are, again, that kind of seasoned Synergy developer, it might be a nice refresher to kind of relearn some efficient programming strategies. So be on the lookout for that. The only other education item, I will stop screen sharing at this point. We have a new PDF available for download in our education library on the website. And I also included it hypothetically, it should be here if you go to you'll see the chat area and the Q&A. It should be available in the handouts section. That's a Synergy style guide, and it just kind of operates. It's kind of an amalgamation of two separate style guides that were floating around internally. And it just kind of it works to solve the same things that. Oh, didn't mean to share that again. Sorry about that. It works towards the same goals as any style guide, just kind of consistency, readability, that sort of thing. So you should be able to download that. I will probably send it out again just to make sure everyone has it. But those are the big points from education. And now we'll finally get to our introduction of Amy here. So I have some notes on this for Amy. So Amy Spain, our new customer support and enablement manager, is bringing to us more than 20 years of experience actually working at UNFI. And after working as a Synergy DE developer and analyst for 14 years at UNFI, she became responsible for building development teams, and later she became national director of UNFI's digital, e-commerce, and EDI teams. And it was interesting because I heard Amy introducing herself to someone yesterday, in fact, and she really emphasized the idea of developing a really good customer experience and just kind of being attentive to that dimension of things, of like, what is the user experience? How are the customers being treated? And I thought that was really nice to hear. So we're so excited to have her on the team. Anything you wanted to share, Amy?
No, thanks, Liz. I'm just wicked excited to be here, getting to know our customers and getting back to learning Synergy DE again. So thanks for the welcome.
Wonderful. Great to have you. And with that, I think we have covered all of our bases here today.
I'm going to talk about CodeGen a little bit, if I may.
Oh, of course. Go for it.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I snuck it in on the end there on you. Yeah, just very briefly, because a lot of people use CodeGen for a lot of different purposes. So just a very quick update on where we're at with the product. We did 14 CodeGen releases last year in 2021 with new features and some bug fixes in each of those releases. Many of those new features are continually driven by Harmony Core, of course, but not all of them. Some of them were related to other things that other people are doing with the product. And there are now several new things that you can do with CodeGen as a result of adding those features. And also, a considerable effort does go into ensuring that CodeGen is backward compatible. So I don't announce every release on the Synergex blog, but the major releases that have significant stuff in, usually I announce on the blog. And I'd strongly encourage you to stay up to date with the latest version. There's generally no reason not to take the latest version. It won't break anything you've already got. It will just add new stuff. You may not be aware there is also a CodeGen command line switch that you can type. I think it's CodeGen -check version or something like that will actually go out to the web and say, what is the latest version? And it will tell you, this is what you're running. There is a later version available, kind of thing. Just very briefly, I'm not going to go through all of the changes that we made in the last 12 months because there were an awful lot of them. But I just sort of cherry picked a few just to give you a flavor of the kind of things that we've been working on. We did recently add support for generating TypeScript code. TypeScript is a sort of higher level version of JavaScript, if you're not familiar with it, that has typed variables. What we're essentially doing here is making it easier to generate. We're generating an awful lot of stuff in the Harmony Core web services world. This makes it possible, and actually in practice, we've been generating client-side code for some of those Harmony Core scenarios. So as well as generating the web service, we can generate some JavaScript or TypeScript code to help the app developers of that web app or web client actually call into the Harmony Core services. So if you're interested in doing that kind of thing, go and check out those latest versions. There are some examples of some templates for TypeScript stuff in the Harmony Core repositories as well. If you look in the templates folder in the Harmony Core repository, there's a TypeScript folder that has a couple at least of example templates. We've also added support recently for specifying the list of structures and/or aliases and file overrides via a JSON file rather than via the command line. So if you do struggle with very long command lines being managed in a batch file for your regeneration environment, you can extract most of that, the list of what you're actually processing, into an external JSON file and name that JSON file instead of naming the structures on the command line. We also recently, one of the biggest changes to CodeGen in the last few years was the ability to generate not only from repository metadata, but method catalog metadata. And we've recently extended that mechanism. One of the things that was missing is in the repository, we always have the long description field and the user-defined text field, and we can sneak secret little codes in there that mean things to CodeGen and cause things to happen. That was missing in the method catalog world. So we've added a method catalog extension file capability that allows you to extend the information about interfaces and methods and parameters and add those secret codes in that CodeGen can then pick up on and do something custom with. So that's a whole new set of capabilities to do with method catalog generation. We've also, related to method catalogs, recently we recently added some expression tokens that allow custom processing based on the names of methods. We found, sorry, not actually the name of parameters, sorry. We found recently an example where a customer had hundreds and hundreds of methods, and the first three parameters to all of them were all the same, and were all information that was available in the environment. So we didn't need the client app to pass those three things in all the time. It was the user, the username, the current tenant, and something else. I forget the language. I think it was. So utilizing this mechanism, we can suppress those parameters by name in the external interface that the client gets to call, and then inject those parameters in code in the Harmony core service. That just makes the interface a lot nicer. Again, a fairly major change that we haven't really leveraged yet, but I suspect we probably will at some point this year, is we've added new ways of processing group fields in CodeGen, which I think is going to be a big deal at some point. Previously, if you had a group in your records, and some people have arrays of groups within groups within groups within arrays of groups, and it gets pretty complicated. And what we always used to do is flatten those into individual fields. Because initially CodeGen was kind of focused on relational database generation, and there's no such thing as a group or an array, so we just flatten everything. In the world we're in now with web services, you can have nested classes and things like that, and hierarchical JSON files that represent those nested classes. So it made sense to, basically the new feature is that you can not flatten groups, but there are some syntaxes that you can use in your template files to, for example, build nested classes within a data model that represent the true hierarchy of that data. We haven't actually gone as far as utilizing that stuff in many of our templates yet, but I think that's an opportunity to improve some things going forward. Another thing we've done is we've added a mechanism that, for want of a better word, I call tweaks. Because every now and again, quite frequently, we get someone who is utilizing a certain thing that CodeGen does, but needs it to behave slightly differently in some cases. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but that tweaks mechanism does make it very easy for us to just have a slight change based on, for an individual, that you can cause something to happen slightly differently without having to do major structural work to change the way that CodeGen actually works. A couple more things before I'm done. We did add support recently, well, maybe a year or so ago now, for generating code for MySQL databases. Prior to that, all of the SQL stuff was all really focused on Microsoft SQL Server types. And there are some slight differences in the MySQL world. So now possible to generate code targeting MySQL databases. And we did do quite a bit of work on the documentation. We simplified the structure of the documentation and also improved consistency across the whole of the documentation set. It is available online. If you don't have CodeGen installed, you can always go to codegen.synergex.com to see the latest version of the documentation. And if you haven't looked there for a while, go take a look. It's not completely different, but it is significantly simplified, so hopefully easier to use. That's pretty much it. Like I say, if you're not subscribed to the Synergex blog, I would strongly encourage you to do so for all of our product release announcements. And like I say, most of the CodeGen releases get announced in that forum also.